Okay, going to look at some history of the atom questions. First one's question 1. Going to look at which of the following statements best described what a scientist initially thought an atom was. And the key part to this is before the electron had been discovered. And they thought at that point that atoms were solid spheres that couldn't be divided up into anything smaller. So kind of just like snooker balls or footballs, they were just solid spheres and they couldn't chop these things up. They weren't aware of any more detail than that. They were just spherical objects with all of the material of an atom contained within that sphere, and they weren't able to get it out. They weren't aware, obviously, of clouds of material as we now believe an electron exists. They were quite happy for the fact that they weren't flat. They were quite happy with three-dimensional spheres, and they weren't aware of this discrete packets of energy situation that we would be aware of now with things such as light and heat. So we can discount the latter three and be quite happy that they thought they were solid spheres. So moving on from that, we now generally have three accepted models that we use to historically develop the atom, them being the plum pudding model, Bohr's model, and Rutherford's nuclear model. Rutherford's model actually coming before Bohr's model in time, but the plum pudding model is a situation whereby they thought that the positive charge was a spherical entity and that the negative charged electrons, they were happy that they had positive charges and negative charges within an atom, but they thought that the electrons, the negatively charged things, were just randomly dotted around the atom. So they just thought that you had a ball of positive stuff with a load of negative charges in there, with the positive parts making up the rest of the space. So they just had this very higgledy-piggledy arrangement of positive and negative charges within the substance. So then, as I say, Rutherford then came along later, and he decided via his alpha scattering experiments, which turn up in question 2, that the atom in his experiments were again spherical. However, the positive charge was now contained in a very dense, small nucleus, and the electrons were around the outside. Wasn't aware necessarily of positions, that comes up later, but they just thought that the positive charge was definitely in the middle, in a very small, dense area, and the electrons around the outside in a cloud situation. And after that, Bohr then came along, and he then started to put a little bit more detail onto that system, and he then came up with the model of the atom that we now know of, with a central nucleus and shells around the outside where the electrons now definitively exist, and with us now thinking that electrons can't exist anywhere other than on those shells. And then, as I say, in 1932, Chadwick then turned up and discovered that in the nucleus there was something else other than just protons, and the name of this particle, a clue in the name of the charge of the substance, but this was the neutrons, and these were in there to help the protons stay together within the nucleus.